Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, April 27th, and this is the joint rules meeting of the Vermont General Assembly. We have one agenda item today, and it's just a discussion on JRS 24. To start off this conversation, I'm going to hand it over to our House Clerk just to give us some background on where we are in terms of remote governing during this pandemic as we do our good work in planning for next steps for the end of session and next year.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Speaker. For the record, Betsy Ann Rask, Clerk of the House, Clerk of this committee. If it's helpful, I will do a share screen to provide a view of this document that we are reviewing together. It is just a simple handout that it reviews the Joint Committee authority to meet remotely and Senate sessions committee Senate sessions and Senate committees and House sessions and House committees. Can you see this handout okay?
Yep.
Super. Okay. So what this handout does, and thank you to Secretary Bloomer too for also, I sent this over to him to review since it addresses both joint committees and the Senate also, but it provides an overview of the current remote meeting authority within the General Assembly. So it starts out with joint committees because that's a topic that you're here to talk about today with the proposed JRS 24 as adopted by the Senate. Where we're at right now for the ability of the legislature to meet remotely, we start with the joint committees. So pursuant to JRS 2, which the chambers adopted on the first day of session, the General Assembly adopted Emergency Temporary Joint Rule 22A, which authorizes this committee, the Joint Rules Committee, to permit joint committees of the General Assembly, including yourself and including conference committees, to meet and vote electronically as you determine appropriate. You have used this authority at your February 11th meeting this year. You authorized all joint committees to meet and vote electronically. Right now, by the current terms of that temporary joint rule 22A, this committee's authority under this temporary rule to authorize joint committees to meet electronically terminates upon the expiration of the governor's COVID-19 state of emergency. What JRS 24, as adopted by the Senate, would do, this JRS was adopted by the Senate and now is before the House, it would amend that temporary joint rule 22A to provide that this committee's authority to authorize joint committees to meet remotely terminates upon the later of either the governor's COVID-19 state of emergency expiration or January 7th, 2022, which is the first Friday of the 22 session. So for example, under this provision in JRS 24, if it were adopted and say the governor's state of emergency for COVID was terminated sometime during adjournment, this joint rule committee would have continued to have the authority to determine whether joint committees should meet remotely. You would be able to maintain that authority through the first Friday of session. It's just a high-level overview of what's going on with our joint committees and with joint JRS 24 as proposed by the Senate. The Senate is set up similarly, and Secretary Bloomer, please hop in at any time if you want to address. But just going by the Senate is set up very similarly, I would say, to that joint committee authority. Pursuant to Senate Resolution 2, the Senate adopted permanent Senate rules, 9A and 32A, which state that when the governor declares any state of emergency, the Senate Rules Committee is authorized to permit Senate sessions and Senate committees to meet remotely, and that permanent authority, which is contingent upon any state of emergency, would expire when the governor ends that state of emergency, whatever it is. What the Senate then went on to do is adopt SR 9, Senate Resolution 9, which notwithstands those current provisions of those rules and say that that authority for the Senate Rules Committee to authorize Senate sessions and Senate committees to be held remotely remains in effect until the later of the termination of the governor's COVID-19 state of emergency or again, January 7th, 2022. So right now, the Senate is meeting in a similar way to the joint committees, how they're operating remotely, in that their Senate Rules Committee gets to continue to have that authority through the first Friday of session of 2022. The House is set up differently than joint committees or the Senate. Pursuant to House Resolution 2, the House adopted House Rules 9A and 29A, which state right within the rule that the House shall allow remote participation in House sessions, and that standing committees of the House are permitted to vote remotely while the House's own declaration of a state of emergency is in effect. The House on the first day of session stated that its declaration of emergency was valid through March 9th of this year. And then the House adopted a follow-up resolution to extend the House's declaration of its own state of emergency through May 15th, 2021. So that's why the House is in a different position, where the House needs to extend its state of emergency to continue to authorize the House and its committees to meet remotely after May 15th. Before I stop share, is there anything that any member would like to look at this document before we move on, Madam Speaker?
Does any member have any questions? I can't see all of you, so if you have a question, just jump in. And I'm not hearing or seeing anything. Thank you. All right, so that's the background on how each of our chambers are looking and organizing around remote governing during this pandemic. And so now we have the resolution coming over to the House. We have postpone action so we can hear from the Senate about their thinking and decision-making on the resolution before we take it up tomorrow. So with that, I would love to turn it over to either the Senate Secretary or Senator Ballant just to give us an update on their thinking in the resolution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am going to ask Secretary Bloomer to offer to you and your House members our thinking behind our resolution.
Thank you, Senator. So there are really two issues. One of them is, how did you get your original version of the joint rules and the joint meetings? The resolution that was passed the first day of this session, which was outlined by Clerk Rath, is identical to the one you passed last March or April, with some dates changed. Back in when COVID first hit, there was a discussion as to how committees would be meeting, who would authorize them. The Senate back last year also invested a lot of authority in the Senate Rules Committee to authorize remote meetings. Our system in the Senate is set up so that they're concurrent electronic, which means people can come in. That's one of the reasons we've had a few people who had electronic issues. And then the Rules Committee is authorized to allow them to be remote, but you don't have to necessarily participate remote. We encourage remote, especially until the vaccine's completely rolled out. And what happens is that ours was triggered on the state of emergency by the governor. In mid-May of this year, mid-April of this year, the governor's state of emergency was ending in April 15th. And didn't really have an expectation that it would end on the 15th, although he has made statements that by July 1st, he expects most of Vermont to be opened up, which at least triggers in my mind that it's sometime between April 15th and July 1st, the state of emergency is going to end. And so that the way that the Senate has worked it, by extending it or by passing our resolution that was covered by the clerk, in that sense, it allows the Rules Committee to allow there to be at least Senate sessions and Senate committee meetings remotely. It doesn't require them. They can decide everybody has to come back for a veto session in June. They can decide that they're going to allow some people to participate remotely, some people to participate in person, but it allows them to not have to come back just to allow remote sessions. I mean, if suddenly things got a lot worse in the beginning of June, and there was some question as to whether or not they wanted to have, everybody wanted to come back, this allows the Rules Committee to make an extension or a decision and to meet remotely. So that's why the Senate sort of changed our rules. If some of the House members have greater questions as to the different approach that was sort of covered by the clerk. Ours are permanent rules that are on our permanent rules going forward, so that if there's ever another state of emergency declared by the governor, there is some discretion in the Rules Committee to immediately go to a remote session. I believe the House would probably have to meet and pass a resolution, but that's for you guys to decide how you want to do it. The senators decided that they wanted to have something in reserve if there was another similar national crisis. So the Senate Rules Committee met and debated what the trigger should be. Our first proposal, to be really honest, was the first day of the session, the latter of the first day of the session. Senator Clarkson, who serves on both, kind of raised the issue, well, does that mean we can come back remote? And so that's why the Friday's picked. If you're wondering why the Friday is picked, it is picked because rather than have there be an issue as to can you do the first day remote or do you have to come back and pass a resolution to be remote, the language has been before commenced. As commenced mean that the speaker can hit the gavel, but there's nothing that can happen or on our side. So to alleviate any questions on that, the suggestion was made to make it January 7th, which is the Friday. So that means that our Rules Committee could say, yep, those who don't want to come back, and then we could extend it further if need be, if there was some other issue or some other reason to do so. So the 7 kind of looks like a weird date to pick, but there was some background and reasons for it. When you're looking at the joint rule, that, as I say, is if you looked at the 2 resolutions, one from last year, which I believe was JRS 848, it's the same whereases. I mean, everything's pretty much the same. There may be a date or 2 changed, but the idea was it was something that the Rules Committees in 2000 thought was sufficient. It worked really well as we were gearing up toward the session. The joint rules, which were sort of planning for this session, asked me to roll out a similar one. And rather than try to reinvent the wheel, we rolled out the same one, which put a lot of discretion in your hands as to what joint committees can meet and when they can meet and what the parameters are, just like in the Senate. And in that sense, you guys tomorrow could decide that there are no longer any joint meetings remotely, the way that these are sort of structured.
May I just interrupt to say, may I have permission to go back quickly to GovOps and vote, and then I'll be right back?
Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you.
So we were actually giving credit where credit's due and mistakes or whatever, not necessarily mistakes. We were on the floor doing ours. And one of the questions came up, well, if we come back in, I'm going to paraphrase, if we come back in June, do a veto session, then we leave, the governor's emergency session ends on July 1st, what happens to joint committees? Does this resolution that the Senate was passing, the SR 9, affect the joint committees at all? And the response really is, as soon as the declared emergency is done with the joint resolution, all joint committees have to meet in person in the chamber or in the building or back the way they were. And so the suggestion was made that we pass a similar one, JRS 24, I guess, for this year. And the idea there is to allow there to be some discretion within the Joint Rules Committee to allow there to be joint meetings remotely. It may even be as things are rolled out. I mean, if suddenly the governor's emergency ends July 1st, whether or not we're fully ready to have everybody back here with all their joint meetings, maybe in some hybrid form, maybe we will be ready. Maybe it'll have to be still remote for a while as your staff figures out, not only the Senate staff, but the IT and the House Clerk's office figures out how to staff those, Ledge Council figures out how to staff them. So it was meant to give some flexibility. It was drafted as doing the least amount of changes to what exists. So if you look at JRS 24, when we drafted it, or I drafted it, I took the existing rule that was there and just amended what you've already sort of passed the beginning of the year. And that was, I think as the clerk mentioned, it was JRS 2, which would have been what you passed the beginning of the session. And we just amended what was passed on the first day of the session, extending the termination or expiration to the latter of the governor's declared emergency, or once again, it was January 7th. So that's, I mean, that's sort of the thought process with some background, maybe more than you want, maybe not enough. If you want more, as my Senate colleagues, my senators would tell you, I'm more than willing to talk and explain as much as you need.
Thank you. So on the House side, we are just starting our conversation about how we move forward and what it looks like for the veto session, which I think we have consensus on around being remote as well, and thinking about what October and January looks like. So we are just starting, we're going to be having a House Rules meeting sometime in the near future to look at that. So I'll turn to my fellow House members here to see if there are any questions regarding JRH 24. Yep, Representative McCoy.
Yeah, well, my concern is, you know, the optics for the state of Vermont. Here, the governor is coming. Most people are going to be vaccinated. That's what the governor feels. And he's going to open the state for business. Everybody's going to go about, you know, their business, going to work, you know, doing all of this stuff. We're opening up venues, and yet we're still meeting remotely. And that's the, you know, that's the issue I have. If in fact the state is open for business, then we should be as well. And I look to committees like, you know, LCAR, which is a joint committee, and that committee historically has a lot of, you know, lobbyists that come in, those individuals who are vested in what actually LCAR rules are being drafted. And I believe that a lot of what we do doesn't take place anymore because of the difficulty of letting people into a committee. LCAR might be in the committee, but anybody else has to be invited to it. The rest are just via YouTube. So I think we've lost a lot of what we've done this past year, and I understand because of COVID and we all went along with it. But when the governor finally lifts his declared state of emergency, I really have an issue with us saying, yeah, but we're not coming back till January 7th. We're going to be remote until then. And in listening to Secretary Bloomer, it seems as if you have the Senate may have, you can come in. If even now, can you come into this?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You want the answer? The short answer is we have concurrent electronic sessions, and we have currently the pro tems is in the chamber. We've had a couple senators come in. We've had one that's local who had a connection issue. He's come in. We have, as I say, we've discouraged it because for distancing and for, you know, having addressed all of that. But I have the opinion, not that I'm right, but my opinion is rules committees and various individuals in legislative chambers can't keep other legislators from appearing in the building or in this chamber. And so ours are written so that if senators definitively said they're coming back, at least my opinion is that our leadership would have a difficult time keeping that from occurring. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm right, but that's my opinion, and that's the way we've sort of set it up that way in the Senate, so that if they have the opportunity to come back, is they're each individually elected individuals.
Right. Okay. I'm not quite sure our resolutions are worded quite that way. I know that our speaker comes in a couple of times a week into her office while we are on the floor, but for the most part, aside from the first 2 days of the first session of the first 2 days of session, no one comes back in to the State House. So that's my main issue. And I just think the optics when people are looking at it and not having us open for business like the rest of Vermont is open for business. I'm going to vote, I'll vote no against the resolution as it stands, because I don't particularly think that it should be the later of the termination of the governors or January 7th, because for all intents and purposes, as we're speaking, seems to me the governor is going to either July 1 or July 4th lift the state of emergency. And here we are still meeting remotely.
Senator Clarkson and then Ballin.
Thanks, Patty. I hear what you're saying, but there could conceivably be another surge in the fall, once people start going back in, and we have a lot of joint committees that are going to be meeting over the summer and in the fall. I think to take away that option until everybody actually really feels fully comfortable being out and about. I mean, just because the governor lifts the emergency order, you and I both know that a lot of our colleagues are not feeling comfortable necessarily being out and about. So I would ask us to think about that as well, and the possibility of, now, if there's another surge, maybe the governor would reinstate a state of emergency. I just don't know, but that is a possibility.
Senator Ballin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One thing that I would like to remind, I can't even say remind Representative McCoy, because I don't know if you're aware, but this morning, Joint Legislative Management Committee met and got the recommendations from the firm that we hired, Freeman, French and Freeman, who gave us sort of an overview of what are possible plans for all of us being back in the complex. And what was clear to the speaker and to me is that it's going to take some months and some complicated thinking and rearranging of spaces in order to accommodate the room that people are going to need to not be breathing on each other. And so that, I mean, just simply put, if you think about I don't spend a lot of time in House committee rooms. I know what the Senate committee rooms look like, especially when we're debating a hot topic and you've got wall-to-wall people all breathing on each other. So I know part of the issue is knowing that not everybody is going to be vaccinated, knowing not everybody is going to know sort of their level of comfort at this point, as Senator Clarkson said, if we do have another surge. I think we're just wanting to be really clear that there is the anticipation that the governor is going to lift his state of emergency. I think we're all looking forward to that. And also knowing there's going to be a few months between when that happens and when folks are feeling safe to have full access to the State House. And I think that's what this is trying to accommodate. And it's terrible not knowing, for me personally, I think that's one of the hardest jobs that I've had as pro tem, is knowing that there's so much that we don't know about how this pandemic will unfold. And so I think our attempt with this rule was to try to accommodate both those things at once.
So I know that our House Corrections and Institutions has done a lot of work looking at 133 State Street to accommodate that extra space. And I think, my understanding is there'll be work done in the State House over the summer. So 133 State Street can be made available to these committees if they, to meet during the summer. If you're saying a couple of months, if July 1, the governor opens it up and you think people are going to need a couple of months beforehand, then, I just cannot get up with January 7th of 2022, because the optics of it, I get that if we need a month or two to, so September 1 or something, we are now meeting in person or, something like that. But I just cannot go along with January 7th. When we have, I just heard 200 million people have been vaccinated and, we're coming out of it. So I have an issue with that. So
I think part of the challenge here that we've been facing this whole time is that we are making decisions in a point of time of what we know. And we don't know what we don't know when it comes to a month or 2 months from now. And I think that having the option to come back and change the rules if we need to is an option that we have. When I think about what it looks like to update the building to make it safe for people to have access, we still have a lot of questions to answer. And when I think of the logistics we have gone through in the past, just when we were making the transition from in-person to remote, how many details and careful time and effort we put into that. And to think about the amount of time we would need with construction and other things, I just see a lot of question marks. And I think there's a lot more discussion to be had about what that looks like in terms of protecting public health and safety and in making sure we have transparency and access for people. And so we're just in this tough spot right now where we need to be able to plan, but consider these other options as well. Does anyone have any other thoughts or points to make? Senator Mazza, and
I
then
just think because of the uncertainty, I'd like to have the options. I think this is a good proposal because the uncertainty, we don't know from day to day what's happening. So I think this is on the right course.
Representative Long.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I heard it earlier and I heard you just repeat it, but I want it to be explicit. This, if we were to support this, it doesn't preclude us from coming back and changing it later, given more information. And so to me, that feels like the safest route, frankly, to go farther out and then make the changes as need be. I just like everyone else, we have no idea what it's going to look like. And I'm actually pretty comfortable with setting a date out farther.
Yeah, Representative McCoy.
Which is actually different from what the House has done right along. We have only gone out a couple of months right along. So this is a huge change for the House. We do not do this. We had March 9th, now we have May 15th. So this is a big change for us.
Yep.
Okay. Any other? Yep, Senator Brock. Oh, you're muted.
Would it make sense to adopt some form of a compromise position in which we set a date to make a decision within 30 days after the governor announces an end to the emergency period? That at that point, we will have to decide whether or not we end at that point or whether or not we extend to a date in the future, instead of setting a date so far in the future now.
Can't we do that at any time we want?
We can, but I'm thinking in particular about the optics of what we're doing right now, which again, the optics are not good.
I see the Secretary's hand up. Go ahead.
I mean, ideally, that would be the way to do it. The problem is you're not going to be here continuously. Generally speaking, these joint resolutions have to be passed by both chambers. I mean, I'm not sure what you're going to do. We're here to serve and do what we can, but generally speaking, if the sort of the schedule I've got from the public is they are getting out the 15th or shortly thereafter, you may have a veto session. You may or may not have something in the fall. The problem is those are your key points where you could have a joint resolution pass again. If you were going to be doing like last year, and I'm not suggesting that, there's nobody on the staff I know that's suggesting you stay here through the whole year. But the idea would be that if you were coming back, then the time that would work perfectly. The problem is you have to pass a joint resolution that needs to get through both chambers, and so the practicality is it's going to be difficult to make it work.
What are we asked to do today? Are we asked to vote on this, make a motion, or?
No, this was purely just a discussion so that we could understand your decision-making process on this, because we have it up for a vote.
Okay.
In the House. Yep. Okay. So I think, oh, did I see a hand? The clerk? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, at first I thought perhaps Senator Brock was describing that this committee would come back sometime after the governor terminates the existing state of emergency to determine whether to continue to use its authority to allow joint committees to meet. I just wanted to, perhaps that was another option.
So maybe thank you. The way that if this passes, when the declared emergency is done, this committee can meet and say, there's no more remote meetings. I mean, the object here is you're not, you can also come back and change the resolution May 22nd if you want, as I think Representative Long was asking. But this gives you the flexibility to stop them if you want. You're just not being stopped without being able to take another vote or having everybody come back at some time and have to pass one. I mean, I think the Senate's, I thought, is it creates flexibility. I understand the question of optics, but unfortunately you're locked within certain parameters of when you meet and when you don't meet, and there's not a lot of other alternatives out there.
Well, I am willing to say that we can come back and have a discussion. We can pick a date and a way for us to come back and keep this conversation going. Okay. I'm seeing some head nods. Yes. Is that okay? All right. Okay. So let's make the commitment that this committee will keep on having a conversation about end of session. We're just talking about joint committees right now, but I think we should keep this conversation going because it's important for us to just know where each body is and trying to do our best to be on the same page. And as we work through that conversation, we also can stay in touch and make the commitment to meet after the emergency declaration is removed. So I'll throw that out there for us for next steps. Are there any other thoughts or next steps to raise before we wrap? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our meeting, and we'll